Hi everyone, I'm Courtney and welcome back to my channel. Today's topic is intermittent fasting. Some of you may have heard of intermittent fasting, some of you may not have, but I will explain what it is today in this video and what the benefits are, why it works, and why it's got the benefits, why it yields the benefits that it does. I'll also be sharing how to do it if you want to try it and see what happens. And then lastly, I will be talking about considerations for intermittent fasting if you're a person who struggles with compulsive eating, dieting kind of mentality, binge eating, restricting, because a lot of my clients and a lot of my listeners are people who struggle with that. And so that's an important kind of thing to take into consideration with all of this. And I wanted to make a video about this partly because I get questions about it fairly often. People ask me what I think about it, or if I've heard of it, or how to do it. But also, it's kind of cool because it's one of the few forms of cleansing or kind of fasting that studies have actually been done on it now. So while fasting and cleanses of different kinds have been around forever, like people have been doing fasting, spiritual fasting, religious fasting for as long as as far as I can tell, forms of it have been around pretty much as long as humans have. And so that's nothing new, but there have not been a whole lot of actual scientific studies done. But intermittent fasting is actually now getting some studies done on it, which is pretty cool. So yeah, so we're going to talk about all that today. So let's get into it. What is intermittent fasting and what is it good for? So the word intermittent means basically inconsistent or sort of not constant. And so the studies that have been done on intermittent fasting are essentially short-term fasts. And if you are familiar with kind of the cleansing detox world, what you really could call it is short-term water fasting, is essentially what these studies have been done on. And so the studies, which I won't be able to recap everything in the studies, but there's some great articles. All you have to do is Google intermittent fasting studies, and you'll get some great, very in-depth rundown on it. But just to recap, the studies on intermittent fasting has shown that it is good for longevity, it's good for weight loss and weight maintenance, it's good for brain functioning, it's good for all kinds of physical things, inflammation, good for people with diabetes. So there's a lot of things that are suggested that it's helpful for cardiovascular health. Lots of good things. Interestingly, when I was reading these studies officially to prepare for this video and stuff, I was thinking to myself, well, this is pretty awesome because actual studies have been done on it. But what they said to me was not a surprise because having studied cleansing for about close to 13 years now, all of these benefits that it was talking about, that these articles were talking about for intermittent fasting are pretty much the same benefits as, say, a long-term juice cleanse, if done correctly, which I have other videos on. So a lot of it operates kind of on some of the same principles. Now, it seems that the benefit why intermittent fasting has these benefits is for a couple of reasons. One reason is that if done correctly, in other words, if it's not like a thing where a person's just binging on nachos and cake and then trying to do intermittent fasting. But if, intermittent fasting is sort of done in the way that these studies were done, is probably the way I should phrase it, then what it results in is less calories taken in, right? So that's part of what they're saying is why intermittent fasting can have these positive benefits is because the person tends to eat lower calories if they're intermittent fasting, and then that's good for all these reasons. However, the other benefit to it is essentially that intermittent fasting provides a longer window of fasting. So it provides a longer window where your body can do repair, renewal, rejuvenation, rebuilding, all these things that your body does when it's kind of in more of a rest mode. Again, similar to long-term juice cleansing. But that's probably one of the other reasons why it's shown to have these results, is because it gives your body more time to do that kind of repair and rejuvenation. Now, if you are going to do a longer term cleanse, like a multi-day cleanse, then I would recommend doing a juice cleanse or a juice feast instead of water fasting, which again is sort of what intermittent fasting is based on, is like just nothing going into the body but water. However, for something that is going to be less in, like a lesser in length than several days or weeks or months, then I think that this is a really great approach. And interestingly, I like intermittent fasting. The term of intermittent fasting, I'd only heard of it within the last few years. But when I did hear of it and read up on how people do it, which I'll explain to you as well, I thought to myself, well, they're calling it intermittent fasting, but to me, those are just good practices for health and nutrition to kind of go about your eating this way. So let's talk about how to intermittent fast. It seems that the studies have been there's been some variety as far as like ways that intermittent fasting can be done, and people do it in different ways. The most popular way to do it, and what, in my opinion, when it comes to just something like intermittent fasting, where it's essentially water fasting, in my opinion, the best way to do it is this way, where what you do is you essentially take a window of time during the day when you're awake, and that's the window that you eat or drink things that are not water. And then outside that window, you fast. So it's essentially a longer fasting window that is built around the time that you're sleeping. Now, typically that is at most an 8-hour window. So typically when you see intermittent fasting done this way, it is at most an 8-hour window. Some people do more like a 6-hour window. I suppose you could do less, but that's the way people do it. Now, an important piece about this, I have seen people who talk about how they do intermittent fasting, supposedly, and their window is skewed quite late in the day. Now, that is not what I recommend. I feel that if you're going to get the best benefits from something like intermittent fasting, you want to skew your window as early as you can. Because if you're just skipping breakfast and then eating a lot at night and calling it intermittent fasting, I don't know how much benefit that's really going to have, compared to if you skew your window earlier. Now, I know a lot of us are really attached to the evening eating, and that's in many cases somewhat of an emotional attachment, which I'll talk to later. But I think that if you want the best benefits, skew it as early as you can. In general, nighttime eating is one of the biggest barriers to health. It's a big barrier to weight loss and weight maintenance. And so, in my opinion, reducing nighttime eating is one of the things that is good to focus on. And a lot of that is because our sleep is meant to be restful. It's meant to be for rejuvenation. It's meant to be for repair. And when we go to bed with food in our system that has not been digested because we just barely ate it, your body's going to have to spend energy on digesting it. Your body will often store it as fat because it's fuel that it didn't need to just lay horizontal for 8 or 10 hours or whatever it is. And so I am a big fan in general, whether you ever try intermittent fasting or not, of just making the time that you stop eating food and non-water drinks as early before bed as possible. I did this intermittent fasting for about a week or so. It wasn't that different for me than how I normally eat. The only real change was like maybe there was a little bit less snacking kind of outside of the windows, but I typically keep most of my meals within that kind of window. I did about an 8-hour window, and I did it from 9 to 5. Now, if I was doing a 6-hour window, I would probably, go for maybe more like a 10 to 4 kind of thing. Certainly some of it depends on how early you go to bed and how early you wake up versus late. because obviously if you go to bed at 1 p.m. or 1 a.m., let's say, then finishing eating at 4 p.m. is quite a lot earlier than that. So it would depend on when you go to bed, but just keep that in mind as I think the best way to do it. And, keep in mind too that with evening eating, which again, I'll talk about more later, just keep in mind, you can always enjoy people's company, right? So if you get home and you haven't seen your spouse all day or your family all day and you want to spend time with them, just keep in mind, you can always enjoy people's company without actually putting something in your mouth and chewing it and swallowing it. So you don't have to feel like it, you can't do that still. Yeah, but I think, the benefit, let's see, the benefit for me as well with intermittent fasting is I noticed that I drank more water as well, because it was like, well, my window of eating hasn't started yet, so I'll just drink water. And then my window of eating has ended, so I'll just drink water, which is a really good practice to do as well, is to keep yourself as hydrated as possible. The other thing that I wanted to clarify is that these studies about intermittent fasting, the suggestion about intermittent fasting, the whole thing, it really means nothing but water outside of that window. And so that means that for you caffeine drinkers or coffee or tea drinkers, or even if you do decaf with soy creamer and stuff, your body will pretty much still register that as food. And so ideally, if you're really going to get the benefits that these studies suggest, you would also have those kinds of drinks within your window. And yeah, so that's essentially how people do intermittent fasting if they try it. Another option that you can do if that sounds like not something you want to do is you could do kind of a window of eating and drinks, but then outside that window you could have green juice. So it's kind of not a water fast intermittent fasting, but it's sort of a juice cleanse intermittent fasting. So maybe you eat solid food for 6 or 8 hours of the day, and then outside of that you've got green juice, which is another great way to go about it as well. So that is the physical side. But I want to talk about the emotional side as well. So when I think back to when I struggled with compulsive eating, binge eating, dieting mentality, and all that stuff was quite severe for me, if I'd have heard about intermittent fasting, what probably would have happened is I'd have been like, well, I should do that, especially if it promises weight loss. I should do that, and I probably would have attempted to do it. And what probably would have happened is I either wouldn't have been very successful because my compulsion with food was so strong, so I would have tried it and gotten down on myself because I couldn't do it, or I would have technically achieved it but binged on junk food within my window, and obviously that's not going to help you. And so I don't want this whole intermittent fasting thing to be something that you listen to and you're like, ooh, new diet, this will be the thing. I wanted to talk about it more because if approached in the right way, the principle of having your body, giving your body time to digest, time to rest, time to repair. I feel that this is pretty much close to how we would eat if we were in a balanced place and a loving place and giving our body kind of what it needed. But I do want, just with anything, whether it's juice cleansing or a raw vegan diet or whatever, it can go either way. It can be either a diet, which is just perpetuating the imbalanced mindsets and the unhealed emotions, or it can be something that is helpful and healthy to do. So, I just wanted to basically reiterate that any dietary approach or even something like intermittent fasting, it can become a diet, and in the sense of its mentality, which wouldn't be ideal, because the truth is that, as I've said before, to achieve permanent weight loss and to truly heal your relationship with food, it is not about finding the next cleanse, the next diet, the next guidelines around this and that and the other thing. It is about looking at what certain food and drink habits, eating and drinking habits, are doing for you emotionally. It's about facing the emotions that are underneath those. It's about feeling through the emotions that is underneath that compulsion. It's about shifting our desire from suppression to feeling, and that is the only way it's going to happen. So as objectively healthy as intermittent fasting is, and even though I do feel that actually once we're through all our food compulsions, we probably would eat this way anyway, or somewhat similar to this kind of a plan, it's still going to be very secondary to addressing the underlying emotions. However, similarly to juice cleansing, I do feel like, on the other hand, intermittent fasting could be a good opportunity to address issues with compulsive eating. Because if you intermittent fast, and let's say you've got a whole bunch of emotions wrapped up in nighttime eating, and if you don't get to eat a lot of food at nighttime, you feel all these other emotions, right? Like maybe nighttime eating makes you feel entertained. It makes you feel comforted. It makes you, feel less anxious. It makes you feel entertained. Well, I said entertained. Well, it could be lots of things, right? Or it could, I know for me, there was a lot of times where nighttime eating, the eating that I did after I got home from a work day, was literally the only thing I looked forward to the whole day, or like in my life, which is sad, So like, if you do an intermittent fast, or you kind of adopt that sort of plan, and you go into it thinking, this might expose some of my emotions. I want this to expose some of my suppressed emotions. And then when those emotions come up, I want to feel through them. Then in that way, actually intermittent fasting could be a good tool for healing our relationship with food. I have often found that most dietary approaches, cleanses, detoxes, eat this at this hour, eat that at that hour, it all, like, it can either be something that perpetuates the dieting mentality, and is not very good for you to keep going down that track, or if it's approached in a totally different way, can actually help you heal those things. So yeah, to conclude, I think that intermittent fasting, whether you call it intermittent fasting or you just kind of take up this idea of waking up in the morning, drinking a lot of water, not bombarding yourself with coffee and a pastry right away, eating as healthy as you can throughout the day, and then wrapping up your eating as early in the evening as you can, there's just going to be so many benefits. I know for me, this kind of approach, again, even though I don't really call it intermittent fasting, but I kind of naturally do it, it's helped me a lot with weight maintenance. I tend to find that I sleep less if I do something like intermittent fasting, particularly if I have as long as possible between when I finish eating and when I go to bed. It's also why people on juice cleanses tend to sleep less, because your sleep is more productive, your body can do more, and so it's a nice feeling to just go to bed feeling good, wake up feeling good. I feel like it helps me with mental sharpness as well. So if you want to learn more about intermittent fasting, Google those studies. Also, if you are a person who struggles with, the compulsive eating, binge eating, diet mentality, I have other videos on this channel about that issue, so you can go and check those out. Also, as usual, I will have Divine Truth videos, which are really helpful for understanding why we have a hard time always doing what is actually healthy for our body, and kind of unraveling the whole issue of food addiction and emotions and emotional healing. So I will have some recommended videos below. My website is courtneypool.com, and I will see you all next time. Bye.